So, welcome to our webinar today. It's called Good Things Grow Here, Cultivating Native Plants as Congregational and Community Outreach. My name's Amanda, and I'm going to be your host or MC today. I serve as the Ontario Program Manager for Arasha, and I'm joining you from rural Hamilton, Ontario, in the Spencer Creek watershed, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Attawandarock, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Mississauga First Nation. And I would love to hear where you're joining us from, too. Please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're logging in from. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. If you know the watershed or the traditional territories, include that too. From Winnipeg, welcome, Cal. From Michigan, we've got representation here from across the continent. This is great. Ottawa, hi, Karen. Kathy, we're neighbors. Bellingham, Washington. Hi, Jesslyn. And Lynn from Aurora. Ingrid, nice to see you again. Ashlyn from Saskatoon. Oh, we do. We cover North America. This is beautiful. What a great group to have here today. I'm so excited. Well, as you know, we're talking about native plants, and there are going to be different native plants in different regions. So, but the principles will be the same. I'm excited for that. As people continue to pop things in there, I'll give you some orientation to our webinar today. Arasha Canada's mission is to care for creation and equip others to do likewise. One of the ways that we do that is by engaging the local church with tools and resources to take creation care into their congregations. And so in today's webinar, we'll be discussing growing native plant gardens, particularly on church properties. But the principles and the information will be just as applicable to you if you're planting a garden at home, at a school, or another community location too. We are following a webinar format for this particular gathering, so by nature it's going to be a little less interactive than some of our other online Earthkeepers meetups. But we still hope there's going to be some conversation in the chat. We'll pause a couple of times for some interactive elements and for some Q&A as well. If you do have questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat as we go along, and we'll be sure to collect them all and address them during the Q&A times. So feel free to type those in anytime you have them come up, and we'll address them at specific breakpoints. But right now, before we get started, I would also love to hear what you are hoping to learn today. And so if you want to pop a quick note in the chat, also letting us know what you're hoping to take away from this session, that would be really helpful and informative. And as you do that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. Paul Wiemerslage is an expert on helping churches establish native plant gardens, and we're so thankful to have him with us today. Paul's official title is Director of Community Programs for Au Sable Institute, which is a faith-based environmental organization located in northern Michigan. And I saw a couple of other Michigan folks in here today. That's great. Au Sable's mission is to inspire and educate people to serve, protect, and restore God's earth. In his role, Paul leads the Institute's community outreach efforts, developing programs that engage local schools, houses of worship, and partner organizations in environmental education and community-led habitat restoration projects. In support of these efforts, Paul also oversees Au Sable's greenhouse and native plant propagation program that produces more than 20,000 native plants a year for use in their programming. Paul, this is an impressive number. He's also a husband and father of 2 girls. Paul enjoys gardening, fishing, and biking with his family, and he looks forward to the day when travel hockey doesn't consume the bulk of his winter. Instinctively, he trusts anyone with dog hair on them. Paul, it is a joy to have you with us today, and I look forward to your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. I'm really happy to be here talking about something that's really close to my heart and something that I hope you guys find useful and can take away some great ideas and maybe some motivation for the future with what we're going to be talking about today. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we can get started with this presentation. So, here we go. So good things grow here. Cultivating native plants is congregational and community outreach. As Amanda said, I direct our community programs here in Michigan. And one of the things that we do with our mission is to try to engage the local community in restoring God's earth. And one of the ways we do that is through use of native plants and community-led habitat restoration projects. Particular note is a sacred grounds program that we partner with the National Wildlife Federation on, and we work with houses of worship to educate them on native plants and teach them how to install native plants on their church grounds, but also how to work with their communities to establish either native plant gardens within their community or work with local restoration efforts by mobilizing their congregation to do good. So today I figured we'd talk a little bit about the benefits of native plants and go into what it looks like to establish a garden. That whole process can be a little bit tricky. But before we get to all that, I did want to talk a little bit about our call for creation. So why we're here today. And these photos that you've got here will make a little bit of sense after I tell a little bit of a story. So Au Sable, part of what Au Sable does is we work with Christian universities across North America. So we have Canadian schools who are involved, and we have schools here in the States. And we act as a field station for some of these smaller Christian universities who send us students every summer. And so these students will come from all over North America, stay with us for up to 5 weeks at a time, and take college courses for credit. And because of this, we have some really interesting interactions with students. We have some really amazing professors who come to teach these courses. And this is a little anecdote from a story that I was privy to a couple of years ago with two of my favorite professors who come out here to teach. So maybe all of you have heard of a plant called spotted knapweed. It's a noxious weed. It's an invasive species, and it's one of these plants that takes over roadways, right of ways, yards that, it gets everywhere. And it's really hard to eradicate. It's one of those things that will probably be around forever once it gets into your ecosystem. But we have a professor here who teaches a restoration ecology course. Um, and everywhere he goes, he walks along, the roadway. We're out on a field trip. He picks this plant and he picks it from the roots and he sets it down and he lays it there. And he lets it dry out and wither and die. And of course, this is like a futile effort because there are billions of spotted knapweed all over North America here that aren't supposed to be here. And yet he continues to do it everywhere he goes. And it takes him a while to get where he's going because when he sees it, he cannot not pick it and put it on the side to dry out. Well, another professor was walking alongside him one day and he asked him, he said, what hope do you have that you picking this plant is going to make any difference? And Dave is the name of the restoration ecology professor. Dave looked at the other professor and he said, I don't know if it's so much of hope, but of faithfulness. And I love that idea that there are certain things that we might not ever fully make better, but yet we have this decree from God to do something, right? And this idea of faithfulness comes in that no matter the call, the effort, we put the effort forth. And I think of hope. Hope is a wonderful thing, but it also seems like this deep external sort of longing for things to come, right? Where faithfulness is that commitment that we have to act and to uphold the duties given to us by God. And so these pictures here on the screen, I guess, are representative of an act of faithfulness here. So this is a garden that we installed through one of our other programs at a local school. And everybody's really excited about the day you install the native plant garden. But you don't always get the volunteers to come back to weed and upkeep and water and tend it which is what we're asked to do. And that's really an act of faithfulness. So every summer, my crew goes out and visits what sites we can when the children aren't there and try to make their gardens look pretty again. And this was one day pulling spotted knapweed. And I think just in this site, we pulled about 150 pounds of spotted knapweed over the course of an hour and a half or something like that. But this work to care for God's earth, this work to make it more beautiful and to restore it and bring it back to health requires faithfulness. And I hope that that's something that we can take away from today. So, as we get into this, we're going to be talking about how can houses of worship use native plant gardening um, for outreach and for good. And so, what are some motivating factors that many houses of worship that we work with see? Um, First and foremost, real clearly early on in the Bible, right there in Genesis, from the beginning, God's asking us to care for the earth. And in Genesis 1:26, he says, God created man in our image, in our likeness, that we should care for the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the beasts of the land. Um, I love that verse because it denotes that we were made in his image and his likeness. And in doing so, as a ruler or caretaker for this place, we have a duty right from the beginning that it's not just people that are supposed to be blessed and to multiply and be fruitful, but God asks for all of creation to do those things. And that's one of those things that's often lost, I think, in our connection to our faith and our God. Many houses of worship will use native plant gardens and things like this for congregational engagement, ways to engage in creation care, ways to draw closer to God, ways to bring congregants together as a community to do good. It's also an expression of our service to our community and an expression of our values. So, in a day when it seems like many churches are at times struggling to keep people in the pews, to keep people interested, to maybe address or overcome maybe some of the hypocrisies that they're getting from the outside. I think it's really important when churches can say, no, look at this is something. Maybe we've got this wrong in the past, or maybe we haven't cared so much about this in the past, but this is a vital part of our faith lives and our faith community to care for this earth, not just because God wants us to do it, but because in caring for the earth, we're also caring for our neighbor. And so it's expression of service to the community. There oftentimes or sometimes can be financial benefits. If you're in urban areas to manage stormwater runoff, to create these gardens, rain gardens, bioswales, cut curbs to manage that runoff, you can see some financial benefits from that. Um, they can be a really wonderful tool for memorials and sacred spaces. Oftentimes we have memorial gardens at churches, and what a wonderful way to honor those who have passed before us with a living testament that honors all of creation through the way that it functions and honors God as a native plant garden. And then there's a host of other ways. There's engagements with the youth in your organization. There's giveaways for plants for the community. There's ways that you can engage and get active in conservation work by mobilizing your congregation. So the call for creation is deep, and here's just a host of motivating factors for why many houses of worship has chosen to work with us in our sacred grounds and native plant programming. So I want to cover real quick some of you. I'm hoping many of you love plants already, and that's why you're here. I'm also hopeful that there's some people who are just curious about plants and gardening and want to come learn a little bit more. So why do we talk so much now about native plants? Well, they're specifically adapted and suited for our regional climates and soils. So Native is a relative term, right? So if you're in California talking about native plants, we're talking about species there, or British Columbia or Ontario, wherever you happen to be. So these are going to be specific to your region, and you need to know, maybe working with extension offices or local government or just regional professionals, what is a native plant to your area, what fits that bill. But they're so great because they require often less upkeep. They're used to the soils that you have, and they are built to flourish in those areas. They also help improve water quality, so they have great benefits here. Many of them have deep roots. They require less water usage because of that, and they create a natural filtration, cleaning up this dirty water. You think about those roots trapping and absorbing pollutants and excess nitrogen and phosphorus that might be flowing through your area, before they reach surface waters and can do some damage. They slow down runoff. So naturally, if they're slowing things down, you're also going to get more infiltration into the ground, and that helps to recharge our groundwater. They prevent erosion. So when we think about, oftentimes you think about sediments getting into streams and is that really a big deal? Well, it is if you're a fish or a macroinvertebrate in that stream that needs oxygen. And also, sediments entering waterways often have hitchhikers on them, chemicals and things like that that can get into the waterways and pollute the waterways. That brings us to our next nutrient management. So native plants, and those deep roots that they have are really good at slowing that runoff, preventing excess nutrients from getting into our surface waterways. And then they also often have beneficial relationships with the microbiome within the soil, to be able to break down these nutrients before they become a problem. Groundwater recharge, as we talked about, is very important if we want to maintain our surface water levels. Snow is very important. Canada gets a lot of it. And having those native plants there prevents that snow and the runoff from the spring thaws from just entering surface waterways instead of entering the slow way by going into the ground and then working their way out through springs. Um, they also support that beneficial wild soil life. So those microbiomes that we were talking about, um, and they're also very important for pollinator habitat. So they're a reliable food source for our pollinators that are out there. Pollinators are so important, not just for the propagation and self population of plants, but they also provide food sources through creating seeds and fruits and things like that. They also have a perfect timing. So nature has a rhythm, right? And so our pollinators come out, native plants have flowers that bloom early and provide nectar and pollen, these important resources for our native pollinators as they emerge in the spring. And then they continue to bloom throughout the summer and fall, providing that sustained food source for them. They also support specialized relationships. So, we know many organisms are specialists and they require certain specific plants to be around in order to complete their life cycles. The monarch is like the classic example. And I'm old enough now to be able to say that 30 years ago, when I was a boy, monarchs were very, very common. You go outside and you would see these, charismatic orange butterflies everywhere. And about 10 years ago, I went through a summer where I saw one monarch the entire summer. And that is a shocking decline in 30 years, to be able to see. So, a big part of that is we all know monarchs need milkweed, and the milkweed was being lost over their migratory routes, and they weren't allowed to be able to complete their life cycle and get to adulthood where they can reproduce. And we saw sharp declines in monarch numbers because of that. So the monarch's a great example of that, but it's not the only example, right? There are all kinds of specialized relationships with plants and insects. They create habitat and shelter. So a lot of the times we talk about or we think about flowers as being a nectar source, a pollen source, a food source for these pollinators, but they also provide shelter and habitat. So one of these photos here is prairie dropseed in the corner. This is a native grass that is a bunch grass that grows low, and pollinators and other insects will use that for cover. They'll hibernate underneath it in the wintertime. It's a very important piece of their overall habitat need. And then when you provide these native food sources, these native plants, you're supporting the food web from the bottom all the way up. So we all know that all of the energy on this planet comes from the sun, but it's useless unless we have plants that can turn it into sugar. And then everything else on this planet, the energy flows from those plants to those other organisms and so on and so forth. The plants are the basic food source for all the rest of these animals. So when I work with my fifth graders, I ask them, do you have a favorite animal? And most of them do. You got a bear, or, even in Canada, you can have a polar bear, a favorite native animal. Um, Very few of them, when I ask them if they have a favorite plant, have a favorite plant, right? But we can't have the polar bears, the wolves, the moose without the plants to begin with. So these native plants support that food web. Um, they also support, and beyond pollinators, they support local wildlife. So as I was mentioning, native plants are nature's grocery store. This is where everything out in nature goes to get its initial needs met. Insects are incredibly important for bird populations. So birders unite around native plants because they understand the value of native plants. A red oak supports hundreds of species of caterpillars that are a vital food source for young birds when they're being reared by their mothers. So, um, vital to have these young insects, not just for the insect's life cycle, but for the other organisms who depend upon them. Again, it's shelter and nesting habitat as well, bedding down areas for birds and deer and things like that. The seasonal support again. So in the summer, they're providing this nectar and pollen for organisms, but that also draws in our amphibians, or sorry, our reptiles, our small mammals to be able to feed on those smaller insects, and then that draws in our larger animals to be able to feed on them. As the fall comes around, these seeds are ready, the fruits are ready, and as winter is there, we have this structure habitat that the native plants provide. And then there's just a better resilience as well and balance to an ecosystem. So when you have all pieces in play, it's like that idea of the intelligent tinkerer, right? The first step in intelligent tinkering is keeping all the parts. Well, if we want to have all these charismatic wildlife that we love, we need to make sure that we have these native plants at the basis of this food chain. And when you have that, you tend to have less pest problems. You tend to have less boom and bust populations of organisms. So it keeps more of a harmony and balance in play. And then the final two are pretty quick. I mean, just in general, native plants are beautiful. They're really pretty. I think a while ago, people tended to think of native plants as just weedy. I don't think people were as aware of the variety of native plants that are out there. And there's some really, really beautiful plants that are there. And then in general, they are lower maintenance. So it's nice. Once you get a native plant garden established, it is less work with weeding, it's less work with watering, it's less work with fertilizing and things like that. Nature knows what it's doing, and it can sort of self-manage itself. I say lower because any garden is happier with a gardener helping to take care of it, but it is lower maintenance than just a regular ornamental garden. So that brings us to our first little stopping point so that everybody doesn't just fall asleep listening to me talk here today. So, uh, Canada is a big region. I tried to pick native plants uh, that spread the gamut of Canada here, but we've got one, two, and three. If you think you know what those plants are, go ahead. You can write down in the chat, and we'll check on those here in just a second. And then also, if there's any questions that have come up in the chat or anything like that, Amanda, you can let me know and I can sort of address those now.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got two questions that have come in the chat, Paul.
Okay.
The first one from Don Buckingham. He says, great session. Having been the manager of our church community gardens, I have always been torn between planting native plants and food plants.
Mm.
As a farm kid, always having a big vegetable garden, I have defaulted to food plants rather than native ones. Do you have a solution to my dilemma?
Both. Why not do both? That's a tough one. I think if you have the space and the interest from the congregation for an undertaking like this, or if you have the motivation and passion to be able to inspire others to want to be engaged in this, I think that will sort of lead your direction of what you think is the most important to do. Clearly, as like a biologist, I would love to see every square bit of habitat that's available, and not being used for a soccer field or a baseball field or lacrosse or whatever, being utilized in a way that glorifies creation. And I think in that way, native plants are really a great way to go. But local food resources, meeting those with growing veggies is a really awesome cause that many churches take up as well. So I think that's it's a great dilemma to have. But I think you can do both. I think you can do both with native plant gardening and things like that. Once you establish your garden, it's some planning, and we're going to go through that process here today. But it's if you have any gardens on your church property, it's no more work or maintenance. It should be less than what you currently have once you get them established. So I love it.
Yeah, I love that too. That you can do both rings true to me. Those native plant pollinators are going to support the veggie gardens, and there are
Yeah.
native plants that are edible too.
Yep. That's
There's
right.
a lot of overlap. The other question here that we have from Ashlyn says, what would you say to congregations who are worried about planting native plants due to spreading? Concerns about the look of the frontage of the building.
hmm That's a big one. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I'll at least bring it back up here in a little bit when we talk about the motivations for this and what are your goals for the garden. I think uh, I think we need to be mindful of the beauty of design. Here, God created an earth that functions in such a way that during every season, there's a role these plants are playing, and that's a beautiful thing. And so when we think about just the native plant for the time that it flowers and is most vibrant and noticeable, we're missing out on all these other pieces of the creation puzzle that that are beautiful for their intricacy and their purpose. And so, as these plants, die back in the fall and into the winter, they're providing vital resources for birds that are overwintering there. They're providing habitat and overwintering space for hibernating insects that we depend upon, for not just for continuing to pollinate our wild and native plants, but if you live near in a cherry orchard or an apple orchard or any of these places, you've got a farm. These are our native pollinators are highly effective pollinators. They're really efficient pollinators. Some of our solitary bees, they're so much more efficient at pollinating than a European honeybee, which is often brought in, to handle the big task of pollinating orchards and things like that. So I tend to talk to people about the beauty of the intricacy of the design, right? So even though these scraggly stalks of plants uh, don't look maybe that pretty visually in the wintertime, what they're doing for the environment is pretty. And then if we slow down, there's some beautiful, tans and deep reds, and there's structure that comes out of it in the winter instead of just a white landscape. The spring cleanup is often, like what do we do in the spring as this thing's matted and how do we care for that? And we can get into that a little bit later, but it's not without some effort, but I think it's just a tweak of how we see things.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. I am seeing some correct answers to the quiz as well in there, so that's good. But maybe you can fill us in on
Good.
all of
So
the
here we
answers.
go. See if you got these answers. That first one's wild strawberry spread across pretty much all of Canada. Um, uh, Tiny little berries, but they taste better than store-bought strawberries. I promise you that. So beautiful plant, low-lying plant that's going to be native and useful across our regions here. Wild columbine's this second one here, and wild columbine is going to be native to Eastern Canada, but you have columbine in the west that are also native. So this is a great early season bloomer for the pollen and the nectar that's needed by those early emerging pollinators. And then number three is that prairie smoke there, which I often think of looking like a truffula tree, something out of a Dr. Seuss book. But again, another low-lying, beautiful and interesting plant that's great for like church entryways when you don't want something big dangling over into walkways and paths. And it maintains this red sort of bulb color throughout most of the summer. Beautiful little plant. So good job, everybody who got those right. And if you didn't, that's okay, because now maybe you're familiar with three early blooming plants that will provide nectar and pollen for early pollinators. Okay, so we can transition now into a little bit of the establishment of your native plant garden if you choose to engage a congregation in something like this. But start with what can a native plant garden be? It can be anything you want, honestly. You can go out and plant however you want to, but there's more effective ways to do it. So hopefully we'll kind of lean you towards the best practices here. But pollinator gardens are just gardens that are going to make sure that during all seasons of the growing period, you've got some plants that are providing nectar and pollen sources for the plethora of pollinators. And you can get specific and really get into the weeds with your design and pick specialized species so that you're helping things like the monarch or the Karner blue butterfly or endangered, species in your area or threatened species by planting the right plant for that critter. And that can be really fun to know that you're doing that good work. The rain gardens and bioswales and cut curb gardens are another thing. This photo of the white church down there, that church was having problems with some foundation cracks in the foundation that were leaking into the building. So we wanted to draw water away from that drip edge. And we created a little bioswale, which is essentially just a pathway for water to flow away. And it's got a little depression to increase infiltration of the water away from the source that you're trying to move it from. And then you plant it, round it with native plants, some that like wet feet and some a little bit higher away from the bioswale that like dry feet. They can be natural playscapes or educational gardens. So the picture with the garden signs on it, this was a church near us that wanted to educate its congregation about the work and really had some strong master gardeners that were in attendance in that congregation and really active. And so they were adamant that the plants that they put in needed labels on them so that people could leave church, know what that plant was that was in bloom, and get interested in wanting to bloom it at their house, grow it at their house. I mentioned earlier reflection and prayer gardens, memorial gardens are great ways to honor members of your community. It can be a community gathering space. So if you just have an outdoor area, picnic tables or benches or anything like that, a sitting spot, place where you want to be able to go outside and host a Bible study or just have some quiet time. It's a great way to accent any outdoor area. And then I say something, anything else. I mean, any way that you would design a garden, you can do the same thing with native plants and make it really useful. So the steps, churches are complex places, and we have members who are who love their churches deeply and feel very strongly about the way things should go. And so it's really important to take into consideration a process that honors uh, the feelings and the intent of the people in your congregation. And so slowing it down and making sure that you have the right people in place from the get-go and that you're informing people what you're doing is very important. So we're going to walk through these steps to activate your space at your congregation or on your church property. So, first things first is you need to form your team and identify your vision. So, who or what is this garden for? Who needs to be on that team? You know, generally, most churches have a facilities either committee or person who's in charge of it. Make sure they're involved from the get-go. Make sure it's something that they're interested in helping you support, because unless you have a really motivated volunteer crew, a lot of the work is going to fall back on your facilities or property people. And you want to make sure that they're happy and on board from the get-go. Pastors need to be on board, and any member who might be on your church council that needs to be in charge. Just make sure the right people are on board from the get-go. And then communicate that vision to the appropriate leadership and committees. So keeping people updated. Maybe it's at your monthly council meetings. But very important from the start to know who's on your team, who needs to be on your team, who needs to be communicated to so that everybody's on board and aware. Then, once you have your team, you need to start thinking about where are we going to put this garden? What makes sense? So, looking at your property, you can go on to Google and get a nice view of your church property from above and take a look and plot it out. But understanding the historical and future use of these sites. So, what was there before? What's there currently? And does anybody else in the congregation have plans for a place? You know, so you see an open spot, somebody might have seen that as a future soccer field, and somebody else might have seen it as a place where they wanted to put a statue, and you see it as a place for a garden. So, is there any conflict that might come up there? It's often good to pick a couple spots to present to council or whoever else needs to be in the know, and be able to talk about those past and present uses and maybe the future uses as well. You want to think about your site characteristics. So if you want a really vibrant pollinator garden to benefit those pollinators, but the only spot that you have available on your church is in full shade, then right away, your kind of vision for what you think you're going to have and what is realistic for that site is going to be in conflict. So it's good to determine the site characteristics that are available to you. What are the sun conditions, the soil conditions, and the moisture that's available there? And that's going to inform your plant choices later on. It's good to know if you have access to a water source. So these are native plants, and we talk about how great they are at water conservation, but they are still plants, and at least during their first year, they will benefit greatly from watering. So from some upkeep that you're going to give them. There are ways to seasonally plant that make the amount of water you need to use to make them happy. Less necessary, but it's still going to be necessary to water these plants. Does the safety of the site line up with your vision for use? So, if you're an urban church or even a rural church near a highway or a county road where people are moving fast, if you want to be able to use that site for a play garden or an educational garden, just making sure that you're aware, like, what is the land use around you, and does that fit your needs for that site or your desire for that site? And then, does the visibility line up with your vision? So if you're wanting to use this site, many of the churches around here, I mean, they've installed native plant gardens because they're so excited about the ability to engage their community in this really cool practice. But if it's hidden behind your church, that makes it really difficult to tell people, hey, look what we're doing. Hey, come on in. We want you to be here. We love you. So think about the visibility of what you're trying to accomplish. If recruiting people or gathering attention from your community is a big part of that, make sure that they can see it. Okay, so then once you've determined the site location where you'd like to put this native plant garden, there's a lot to consider, but we'll break it down a little bit. So generally, your plant selection is dependent on the site characteristics. So like we said earlier, if you want a really vibrant flowering pollinator garden, you only have a shade, you need to adjust your expectations for what your pollinator garden can do or look like, because oftentimes the way it goes is that shady plants are just a little bit less dramatic than those prairie plants that like full sun or part sun. Soil moisture, and so if you're near a wetland or a seep or a low area, that's going to determine if you can have wet plants or dry plants. Um, and then plant selection is influenced by the garden type, which we already sort of addressed with the pollinator garden shade species. Um, Arrange your plants short to tall, which is a simple design practice. If you're working near a walkway or you're working near a road, if you have your tall plants up front, that blocks everything that's happening from behind. If you want that because you want to create some sort of a border or a block from a road, then there's a reason to do the opposite of what I'm telling you right now. But just know that based on your surroundings, you need to think about the sizing and spacing of your plants. Generally, we tell people to create a bouquet effect with their plants. So it's easier for pollinators to find a clumping of plants. Let's say you're going to go plant mountain mint. It's got these little white flowers. And if you have 1,000 square foot garden and you have one mountain mint in bloom, that's less luring and attractive to pollinators that are passing through or trying to find those plants. So we tend to plant in clumps of 5 to 10 plants of the same variety so that when they do grow up, they can prop each other up as they're growing, and then they bloom at the same time, creating a nice large bloom that is sort of a billboard for these pollinators as they come through. It's also more appealing to the eye because as you look at a wave of green plants, when you get these clumps of blooms rather than just these individual flowers, it tends to just draw the eye a little bit better. With your spacing with these plants, that's going to inform your quantity. But generally, if you're using young plants, plugs, which are just less than a year old, which is kind of the most effective way to get established plants quickly, um, a general rule of thumb is about every square foot, you're going to plant a plant. So install that plant every square foot. You will get some plants that will die off. You'll get others that will come in a little bit more aggressively and they will start to fill in the spot. We talk about staggering your blooms. So making sure that you're picking plants that are blooming at every part of the season. So if you select 15 different varieties of plants, maybe make sure that like 5 of them are blooming in the springtime or early summer. And then another 5 varieties are blooming midsummer. And then another 5 varieties are blooming in fall to late fall. Not just for interest as people in your congregation are walking through and looking at these plants, but also to support the pollinators who are depending upon the pollen and the nectar. Um, you can watch out for aggressive plants as well. So sometimes this is great to have aggressive plants because they can take over and establish really quickly and make you look like a genius for how like creative and wonderful you are at establishing this native plant garden. Sometimes those plants can take over and become the only plant there, and then they're a lot of work though. So depending on the amount of area and space you have, if you want things to kind of stay put, if you're a picky gardener and you want things where you place them, um, be aware of the aggressive plants that might move in and around. And when you're looking to source like plants or seeds or anything like that for a garden, as you're doing the research, most websites will tell you, is this recommended for home landscaping or is it aggressive? So it's something that you need to keep a watch out for. And then again, if you're doing any sort of bioswale or rain garden, then you need to incorporate the dry areas and the wet areas for where the water will be inundated and fill within this garden. Um, Here is a visual of a native plant garden that we did near us. It was 2,000 square feet. And the way that we draw this up, sometimes if you're intimidated by like design, there's a whole host of design applications that you can create to get a really, really nice looking visual of what your native plant garden might look like when you're trying to convince people of your site design. But they can also just look like this. This is, a way that I still use often because graph paper is great. If I want every square to be a square foot, then I know how many plants and how much area my garden's going to cover as I design like my layout and my mixes for that garden. So, and then you can see within this visual too, you can see I've got, the red beds, the violet beds, and the green beds, and there's mixes in there that are plants that take into consideration the bloom times, the height, and shade and sun factors. So within each of those mixes, you can just your congregation or whoever's helping you plant this, your volunteer, um, can just take any of those plants and plug them into those areas as you delineate where you want your garden, what you want your garden to look like. Okay, so we're going to get a break here real quick and come back to some questions, but um, I want to talk generally about preparing your planting site. So once you've got your site located, you kind of have been messing around with a design for your planting and which plants you want to include. Then it comes down to preparing your planting site. So uh, of course, you want to locate your utilities before you do any sort of digging or messing around with the grounds. So water, gas, electrical stuff. Make sure that you're contacting the people who you need to contact to let you know where those things are. And then remember that the pre-existing conditions will influence your timeline. So as you establish a timeline for your project, you're going to work back from your planting time. It will inform when you're going to be needing to get this preparation done. So if you're converting an existing garden, that'll take a certain amount of time, or are you starting from scratch? And we'll kind of work through each of those options and the different methods that you can use to prep your site. Um, you can, if you're starting from scratch, we'll talk about how you remove the turf, smothering options, and solarizing options. And then it's just a matter of choosing which method you're going to use and organizing your crew to go out there and get that work done. So if you are converting an existing garden, this is an example of a church near us. They just had a shrubby front to their church that it was a high visibility site. So their goals were to educate their congregation, influence them, influence their community, and have something native that was going to take over. So they have this like creeping juniper that's down, and we ripped all of that out. So it's because it was an existing site, the method of handling it was manual removal and organizing work days with your volunteer crew to go out there and just make slow and steady progress. If you are converting an existing like ornamental garden, you want to change an ornamental garden over to a native plant garden, then you can also think about like, can you dig these plants up? Can you dig these bulbs up? Can you give them away to people? I love native plants, but I also love ornamental plants. So I think there's a place for all of it in the world, and they can be very beautiful. And I hate anything to go to waste. So if there are people in your congregation that would love to take home some of those ornamental plants, I think it's really neat to be able to give that opportunity for them. And then you need to consider with your planting site, are there aggressive, invasive, or hardy plants that need to be managed? Um, and if so, the proper strategies for um, removing the invasives or making sure that the aggressive plants and the bulbs and everything are out of there so that they don't create more problems for you later on. This process can be labor intensive. So when you're choosing your site and you're thinking, well, this garden, isn't really functioning in a way that glorifies God the way we want it to through a native planting, think about how much work's going to go into converting that over, and then choose a new site or be diligent and God be with you. Okay, so if you're not going to convert an existing site, let's say you've got some grassy area that's undisturbed, or maybe it is disturbed, but you want to turn that into your native plant garden. One option is to just use turf removal, and so this is the process of going in and digging up an inch and a half to 2 inch underneath that sod and removing it. Having a place to put it when you're done is really important. It's labor intensive. You can rent sod cutting machines, which, if you're going to do anything of any big size, I would say is well worth it. If it's a smaller size garden, 250 square feet or something like that, a shovel and a little bit of diligence, and you'll get the job done pretty quickly. But anything larger, I would say a sod cutter is a nice thing to be able to have. Um, so the nice thing about this is if your timeline's short, so if you've got, I mean, you can plant pretty much as soon as you pull the turf out. So this can be a really quick turnaround for you if you've got some really interested people who want to move quickly and you've worked through all the little kinks that come up with the rest of the congregation and your council. Um, Turf removal can be a really nice option. Um, it's a lot of work, but it's well worth it if you have the right space. Smothering is another option. So this would be the process of laying mulch down, or sometimes cardboard and mulch, or sometimes newspaper and mulch, but something just to block out the area uh, and smother the plants underneath, and then you can plant into that newly smothered area not too long after this process. So it's a good process for you if the site is small to medium. If your timeline's a little bit longer, we usually say about 1 to 2 months, but there's some evidence that you could plant almost immediately, and I can talk about that in a little bit. Um, and then this is a good one, especially if you're in proximity to sensitive habitat or water. So where any large disturbance might, affect those areas. So the process for this is you're going to want to go in and mow down the turf or the area nice and low, as low as you can go. Lay cardboard or newspaper down. Cardboard is preferable. Newspaper, if you do it, it's nice to have several sheets of newspaper down instead of just one sheet over each site. You're going to lay mulch about 7 centimeters. I'm into inches in America here. 3 inches, 7 centimeters, something like that. About your
We
finger
do
thick.
inches too. You're okay.
Okay, okay, yeah. And then water this. You can water it to speed up the process, or you can let it sit there and let nature water it with rain. And then you can generally plant in 1 to 2 months. If you water this by hand, or a sprinkler system, your area, and you wet it down real good, and let it sit for a little bit, 1 to 2 weeks, you can plant into that. The cardboard is real easy to get through. The only thing that does is any holes that you're creating in the cardboard with the planting, there's just a chance that it hasn't quite smothered out everything underneath, and you might get some more weeds popping up in between. But there's no reason why you can't do it sooner than 1 to 2 months, other than it's a little bit less labor intensive with weeding later on if you give it a good amount of time to kind of smother everything underneath. It's effective, it's natural, it's slower than the manual removal, and you do have to, have your committee aware that you need to be storing or stockpiling cardboard for use in this. The cardboard that you use, you want to make sure it's not glossy cardboard. You want to remove any big stickers from it, things that won't decompose later on. Solarization is another option for you, and really this is just the process of using basically a greenhouse effect. So laying a plastic tarp down and letting the heat kind of soak into the soil there, and it will kill off weedy seeds and any roots of plants that are there. Then after 2 to 3 months, you can come back in and you can plant, and you got a fresh site to work with. So this is a good process if your site is small to medium. So it's not great for really large sites. The timeline to plant is longer. So if you know you're going to be planting in the fall, this is something that's great to be able to establish and do during the summer, and then remove that tarp in the fall before you plant. And then, of course, it's a really good option too if you're in proximity to sensitive habitat or water. So I know Canada has different rules or regulations than the United States on herbicides, and so that's why that piece is in there. But if there is, there's certain situations or instances where herbicide is not available, or would be a really bad option. So this is a great use of prepping a site. The process is that you want to come in, you want to mow really shallow, really low. You're going to shallow till. So turn over that soil. We say a shallow till because many of these areas have a historic seed bank set up in them. So if you do a deep till, what tends to happen is you just turn over more of those seeds that are dormant, laying in the soil, and it can create problems that way. So shallow till is fine for this. Then you're going to water this real heavy, get it nice and wet, and then you're going to cover it with a plastic tarp. So you can use a painting tarp that you buy at the store. If you have leftover plastic, you don't want any gaps or holes in it because that's going to allow heat to release. But you secure that tarp over that site, and then nature will do its thing. The sun will beat down on it. It'll heat up that soil, cook those seeds and roots of those plants, and then after 2 to 3 months, you're good to plant on that location. It's effective. It does produce waste with this tarp. And in this day and age, right, we think about now we know more about microplastics and plastics. So you're using this big plastic sheet to effectively make a native plant landscape. So it can get a little tricky with that, but if that's a resource you have, it works to allow you to create this garden. If visually you're on a high visibility area, stretch of road in a town, it can tend to look unkept. But the other thing I'll say is it also will show people you're doing something. So I think it's a matter of perspective on how you want to see that. And then this process is slower than manual removal. So that is our little bit of a stopping point if anybody has any questions about the site prep or any of those steps that lead up to when you're preparing your planting site.
There were a couple of quick questions.
Okay,
I am also just being mindful of the time. We're at 1:30 my local time, and we've got about 15 minutes
great.
left. So I'm going to do the questions quickly so we can make sure we get to
Good,
the rest of your presentation.
good.
Uh, Kathy is wondering if she can replace some non-native with native slowly over time. In particular, she's concerned wondering if native and non-native plants coexist okay.
Yep, absolutely. So no problem there. Take your time, ease into things, and especially, native plants can be really expensive. And so if you go to a nursery and you buy a gallon pot of purple coneflower or name your native plant, you might spend $13 for that plant, and they're perennials, so they do come back. So it's an investment in the future. But sometimes the most cost-effective way is just a little bit at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Nicolin is asking, is smothering effective for wild grassy fields?
Yes, it is. The short answer is yes, it is. Same process, mow it down low, lay cardboard and mulch. Just mulch alone, I don't think would be as effective. There is a way to smother with just mulch, um, but I've found over the years that cardboard seems to always be more effective at managing weeds popping back up. The challenge that happens with some of these grassy fields is that where your borders of your garden have more grassy, and if it's like brome grass or some these really weedy grasses, they'll tend to creep back in from the sides and get back in there and kind of create some problems. So it does work, but it gets a little tricky with edging and how to keep stuff out.
Do you have a recommendation for that edging?
Yeah, I mean, you can dig that, you can place edging in. You can do that. So if you go down, if you buy a 6-inch edge or something like that, these grasses are the problem with them is they're rhizotomous, so their roots are kind of traveling along. And so if you're blocking, you have a blockage to prevent those roots from creeping back in, then that helps. But the other thing is you can keep mowing a border. So make sure you're like preventing that grass from really getting nice and hardy. Keep it low, um, and make it kind of focus on its own growth rather than spreading out.
Yeah, great. Ginny is asking, what is the downside of sod removal on the microbiome of the soil?
You're taking the first like inch and a half. So it's not as impactful. Even smothering and solarization, they have these smaller scale impacts on the microbiome, but we find that it comes back really, really quickly. And so if we were talking about solarizing or turf removal of like a huge area, then you start to look at it and you go, we're trying to do this beneficial thing, but it also comes with this downside. I think on really small scales, I don't think that is something that you need to weigh as much. 1,000 foot, 2,000 square foot garden, something like that in the grand scheme of things is pretty small. And then, yeah, with the turf removal, because you're just taking this top layer, it is a lot of organic stuff, but there's enough that should be down below that that will come back quickly.
That's great. And then one last question, kind of a broader one here. Again, a comment from Don. He says, a comment I have would be that from the first planning stages, the church garden community should have a solid idea that this is a long-term sustainable project and that it will be multi-year, multi-season.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's difficult to maintain the momentum. Any ideas on how to keep the enthusiasm up to meet this challenge?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question all around is how do we sustain and really anything at a church? So, many of our initiatives start with a champion who has a lot of energy and enthusiasm for something. And then when they're no longer around, we see programs and things start to fall off to the wayside. So my first thought is if you don't have a champion who's willing to really lead this for a while, it's probably not the right time for you. If you are not excited about it, it's probably not the right time for you. So, your reasons for getting into it from the get-go, we can justify it environmentally, we can justify it biblically, but you can't, draw that horse to water if it doesn't want to go. So you got to make sure that you just have a champion or a team that is really excited. And then long range planning on anything can be difficult within a church, but property, facilities, those people managing those areas, you're always going to have them. And if that's part of what your church is committed to, this is a core value or piece of your church to really emphasize creation care. I think it's justifiable through the workforce of the church as well.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Paul. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make
Yeah,
sure you tell us the
quick.
next thing. So let's
Yeah.
carry on.
Yeah, quick. We'll go a little bit quicker here. Here's your native plants pop quiz for this one. Butterfly weed, wild lupin, fireweed. Wonder if you got those. Wild lupin is the eastern species, so is butterfly weed, but for wild lupin, you do have a western species that would look somewhat similar in work. And then fireweed is widespread throughout all of Canada. Okay, so let's get to this garden installation piece and see if we can handle any questions that might come our way. So, uh, on installation day, you've prepped your site. Now you're getting ready to install. Hopefully, you've been informing your congregation about what you've been up to and your need for help if you need that to get this installation going. Think about what equipment you might need. We use a bulb auger. So if you look at the top photo there, there's a guy with a little drill. You can buy those in the hardware store. They're really effective, a lot quicker than using trowels. But we just drill the holes and we put these plants. You can see right below there, the image of the guy and the girl there. They're pulling these little native plant plugs out of a tray and then open up the roots and install them. So you can use a drill or a bulb auger for installation. Trowels and shovels work too. Um, 5-gallon buckets are really helpful for mulching, flags, anything like that. Marking paint is important for delineating where your plants might go. And then it's important to communicate the process. So you want to demonstrate for everybody. The last thing you want to do is install 200 plants and get the kids involved for the photo shot and everything like that. And then nobody's putting the plants in properly and they're airing out and dying. So demonstrate for everybody what you want that planting to look like. Generally, you want to compress down around the edges, open the roots out and plant it, and then mulch afterwards, and then water. Water real good. You want to develop, depending on the size of your garden, a strategy for staging your plants and marking their location. So for this garden right here, this is the schematic for it, and then you can see there's spray paint out there that delineates those different areas, and then little flags that denote which section it is. So if we went to the tall prairie mix, we would stage all of the plants there, wild bergamot, tall sunflower, early sunflower, they all get set right in that area. And then you can let your volunteer group know that you're putting these plants in clumps of, 5 to 10 of each species right next to each other, then switch to another species, then switch to another species, and repeat all the way through that area. Sometimes people want really specific gardens. So instead of doing these mixes, you can get garden designs that say, I want this specific plant here and this specific plant here and this specific plant here. The process is still pretty much the same. You come back into your area and you delineate with some marking paint on the soil where you're going to put the things, and then we flag. We write the name of the plant that goes there on a flag, and we match that with its flat of plants, and then instruct people how to plant, and they install. So here's the maintenance and upkeep part. So you do from the get-go, just like the question was asked, like there is maintenance, there's long-term plan for this. So you need to think about how are we going to care for it and who's going to care for it. So I've worked with churches where they have a dedicated volunteer base to adopt certain sections of the garden. In fact, if I go back up, this is a house of worship that the medians within their parking lot, they planted with native plants, and they had different committees within the church adopt a different island. So then their time of the year, they were in charge of just weeding and making sure that their island was in good working order. So it's a way to take a bite out of a really big project and make it more manageable. Um, Educate the appropriate people on how you want to care for your garden. So thinking about watering, if you have access to water, it's always great. Plants, they're living things. They need water. If you can give them water sporadically or through drought periods, they're going to be all the more happier. But it's especially important the first year or so. Make sure you're out there weeding the annual weeds that come up. It's nice to get a initial weeding done in the spring and then another one mid-summers, because a lot of these annual, if you handle your annual weeds enough, you're really cutting back on that seed base that's in the soil that could be creating problems in the future. And then the seasonal upkeep that we also touched on this a little bit earlier. What are you going to do with these things in the fall? Are you going to cut them back down? Are you going to deadhead everything? Are you going to leave it up in the winter? Are you going to clean it up in the spring? My answer to all of this is really simple. This is God's design for how things worked. Nobody was out there with pruners, in Jesus's time, knocking down the plants. And there is a purpose for the layering of these plants, the insulation of the ground, and the hibernating spaces for critters. So it's a matter of perspective. Now, the side that you might say is, providing a beautiful habitat that provides nectar and pollen during the summer and growing periods is a very beneficial thing to do. And if it's a hill that somebody's going to have to die on about whether or not you cut these plants back to get approval from certain members of the congregation or these committees, then cut them back in the fall. That's fine. At least you're providing a source of pollen and nectar and beauty and inspiration during the summer. But if you can keep them year round. Just keep them there. Outreach and education, real quickly. So, what do you do after your garden's established? There's so many cool things you can do. Um, Make sure you're communicating your effort to your congregation so that they know it was happening and what this new project is you have. You can ask about how do you want to engage your congregation or community. We've done seed collection events. We've done starting plants. You can start them in milk jugs. You can collect seed and you can start it in trays or yogurt cups or whatever you want, and you can then give away plants the following year to your congregation as they leave. And now your garden isn't just at your church, but it's spreading out into your congregation's homes and into your community. You can get your creation care team or your gardening team involved in local conservation efforts. You can host a garden tour. You can start a creation care team. You can focus on it for a month. You can do things with your Sunday school and vacation Bible school. So there's just a ton of options. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about this afterwards. This is stuff that we love to do. It seems like a lot. I promise it's not too much. It's preparing a site, putting some plants in the ground and watering them. If you've done that, you're on your way. So that's it. There's this last quiz, but if there's any questions or anything like that anybody has, I'm happy to answer them.
That's so great. That was such a breeze through the outreach possibilities. And I think they could multiply. We could have so many more ideas. There's as many
Yeah,
possibilities as there are people, really. And
yeah,
that's the beautiful thing about these gardens. That's great. We had a few questions about mulch.
yeah.
What kind of mulch have you used? What do you recommend?
Yep. Triple shredded pine is what we use here. You can get, double shredded. It's just a little bit bigger. Triple shredded is a little bit smaller. It has a little bit better way of smothering out that, not preventing as much air and everything to get down to some seeds that might want to establish. And then it breaks down really quickly. It's pine, so it'll decompose quicker, and then you've got a fully natural habitat after it's decomposed.
That's fantastic. Um, that was all of the questions in here. I see that Ingrid knows her plants.
Oh,
Ingrid
love
has, I think Ingrid, you've known all of them in every pop quiz. If we had prizes, we'd give them away.
Oh, we should have thought of that. Shoot. Yeah, we got it. So little blue
Amazing.
stem over there, harebell in the middle, and smooth aster on the edge there.
There
Yep.
is there's so much variety of these native plants, Paul, and I love that you've highlighted a few of them for us.
Yeah.
It's I am the vision of getting these established at church communities and the outreach possibilities as well as the ecological benefit here, I think is so beautiful. I know I have learned a lot from you. I also feel somewhat like, wow, I got to gather a reasonable sized team to be able to pull
Mhm.
this off well.
Yeah.
But that's really helpful. One last question here before we wrap up. I know we're slightly over time, but the question here is how do we convince congregants to change? If they like this manicured lawn look, or if they like things neat and tidy, or if they're stuck on another use for a property, do you have any suggestions for convincing people?
Yeah, I think I think you need to ask people why is it that they feel that only ornamental plants or non-native plants are sufficient for them, or why they like that. Because if it's a sense that these gardens are dirty or messy, that's just not true. These are native plants. Every plant is native somewhere, right? And so you're just taking a plant from another area and putting it in a new area. I think it's also people aren't aware there is such an array of beauty that is
Mhm.
out there to be had in native plants. Many of us, a lot of these prairie areas that would have normally housed these plants have been disturbed. They're farmland now, or so we haven't been as exposed to the wide array of these plants that are there. And the more native plant providers are starting to pop up in areas, the more awareness people are starting to get. And so I think it's maybe just taking another look at it. And then there's always the compromise piece, like you've got all ornamental gardens at your church. How about we have a native plant garden and see how that goes? And then maybe slowly and incrementally we can start incorporating more and more natives in.
Yeah, that's great. That's realistic. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, we are just a couple minutes over, but I just want to give a couple of concluding thoughts here. Thank you, Paul, so much for your presentation. It leaves me with lots of info and lots of questions, and that's
Yeah.
a good spot to be at the end of a webinar. And I want to thank everyone also for coming. Your participation has been so helpful in here. I know that there are a couple of people, at least on this call, that I know of who have native plant gardens at their church. So perhaps we could organize some kind of a follow-up thing.
Mhm.
We do host regular online Church Earthkeepers meetups throughout the year with Arasha, and some of those are more conversational or more prayer focused, whereas this one's more webinar format. The next one of those will be in April, and we'll make sure to send out the date for that in the follow-up email. I'm also posting a link in the chat here. You can head on to there as well, and you'll see links. You can even sign up to be notified about upcoming webinars and Earthkeeper meetups. The other thing in there, if anyone is interested in talking further about church earthkeeping in general, we would love to hear from you. There are a few of us on the team that are available for conversation or coaching to help you move your congregation forward in your next steps of creation care. And so on that same website, you can click a link there to get in touch with us, and we would love to have more individual conversation with you that way. We will be sure to include that link to the website as well as some follow-up resources that Paul has prepared for us to send you and a recording of today's webinar. We'll get all of that to you later this week by email. And I think that's it. Once we send that, you'll also have contact information to get in touch with us, and we'd love to carry on the conversation. So thank you everyone for coming. We'll enjoy talking to you again later.